as I'm walking through the neighborhood, finding myself distracted as I'm trying to record this video. It's interesting to see how like waves of emotion sort of rise and move through us, even when we're doing something that is like only slightly out of our comfort zone. It's an interesting challenge to summon our thoughts and try to stay on track with where we are. Seems to be one of the things that I'm trying to work on is strengthening my resolve in following my track and maintaining my course in the midst of feelings that kind of steer me off course every now and then. And so the topic that I wanted to briefly discuss here was something that I thought about earlier this morning, was often how it seems like life is a series of choices that lead from one place to another. And, from a young age, we're raised to trouble over decisions and try to always weigh the outcome and come out with the best, thing, the best circumstance. And so it's like we trouble over our decisions, and so a lot of pain gets associated with making decisions, and it always feels like we're being held accountable, not only by those around us, but more importantly, the authority figures that sort of imprinted on us, regardless of whether they were worthy of our respect. They sort of remain sort of ever present, haunting us in the background. Even if we don't agree with their values, somehow we still question ourselves based on those standards. And so it seems like life is like this long chain of decisions, and we have to make the best ones. But I was thinking, what if we didn't worry so much about what decisions we made? It's like decisions are happening constantly, with or without our knowledge, our conscious knowledge. So we're constantly, what's really happening is we're sort of moving fluidly from one state of consciousness to another. And so what's important to remember is that part, we're moving through consciousness. And so every choice that we make, the important part of that choice is, how is this choice going to affect my consciousness, my state of consciousness, my state of well-being? And when you move into a state that is uncomfortable, sometimes we can panic and we feel like, I got to make a choice to feel better that will make me feel better. I got to put myself in a different circumstance. I got to surround myself with different people. I got to be in a better place. I got to stop doing this, and this, and this. And, it just creates a lot of worry. What is it that you're choosing here? Because there's a choice being made here. And the choice seems to be to underline worry. And so, the pain of worry is becoming the choice that you're making for the state of consciousness. So the choice ends up being is to underline a negative state in consciousness, a negative or an unpleasant state of consciousness. When we begin to fret and worry and feel like, now I got to make a decision to move away from this. When in reality, if you go back to the principle, so if you go back to the principal guiding value of what you want your choices to be motivated by, which is what state of consciousness do I want to inhabit, then creating worry, additional worry about worry is counterproductive. So it's sort of, when you notice yourself uneasy with a circumstance, remembering not the negative feelings that you're experiencing, but sort of allowing those negative feelings to exist without calling them negative. That allows for the possibility of a new association to be formed with those feelings. And that in itself is a decision to move to a more positive state in consciousness. So regardless of where we end up with what we feel, we remember what's important is that life is always happening, decisions are always happening, and what life is a constant state of movement from one state of consciousness into another. And that when we find ourselves in a difficult state, begin fretting about it and worrying about it, rather than sort of accepting it and allowing it to be, and sort of to put our tentacles out there to be curious about, well, what is this saying? What is this meaning? Where could this lead me? Where could this lead me? What's being, asked of me here that I haven't considered before? What is it that I'm trying to brush away? Because it makes me feel uncomfortable, essentially. And, there's a lot of dark places that we can find ourselves in. But, it's always tempting to get into mischief by trying to focus on, our physical surroundings and the physical circumstances of what things appear to be, instead of sort of going within and looking at, the quality of our being. What is the quality of our being? And why does that feel threatened right now? Why is the quality of my being threatened? Why do I stake some part of my survival on something that is making me feel afraid, making me feel like that there's some part of myself that I don't want to look at. And if I could just change my circumstances, then maybe that part would go away, and then I won't have to be here and sit with it until it reveals to me whatever ugly thing about myself that I don't want to know. Whatever experience that feels too overwhelming to be able to incorporate into who and what I am. But I think who and what we are is, it's an evolving journey through consciousness. And there's, every location within consciousness is a legitimate location. And the one thing they all have in common is they're all impermanent. And so resistance often leads, somewhat ironically, resistance often leads us to linger in a certain location within consciousness longer, because it's like we're both running away from and gripping on more tightly to something, because it's like there's some fear that we will just sort of dissolve and the ground beneath our feet will fall away and we'll lose ourselves in some kind of death of the of the spirit. But it's really like the death of our identity that we often fear more than the death of our spirit. And when our identity has been so heavily encroached by so many injunctions, where every decision turns into a painful, laborious task to evaluate and execute, then we don't really have much of an identity. We just have this fragmented sense of self that is all about avoiding pain and avoiding change. And that's a problem, because change seems to be the rule. And being able to maneuver through the constant changes, it's like the world around us appears to change, but that really doesn't really mean anything, and yet it means so much to us. And it means so much to us, which shows that what is really happening is that we are changing. So it seems like the world is changing, but it's really just, it's more emblematic of our nature. And so we resent change, which means that we resent a fundamental part of what makes us who we are, which is an evolving being. Anyhow, so yeah, I think with that I'll leave it here. Have a good one.